Jesse, let me start with you and the wonderful reporting from ProPublica on this, which is, by the way, just a new installment in a lot of great reporting that you're doing on the topic. What's the conclusion here that one draws? Thomas was dissatisfied with his income, shared that information with some people, and then in the midst of that was developing relationships with people who could help him do better on the salary he was earning.
Yeah, well, we are trying to provide the facts here, and people can draw their own conclusions about the timing and what happened. But clearly, Thomas was deeply in debt. He didn't come from huge amount of wealth, so he didn't have, some kind of big family patrimony to fall back on. And he was making a lot of money for an average person, but he certainly, he's making the equivalent of over $300,000 in today's dollars. Plus, Ginny had about $100,000, so they're making $500,000 in today's money. But that's not remotely what law firm partner at a major firm in D.C. or New York would be making. So he's feeling pinched, he's feeling squeezed, he's got debt, and he says to this congressman, one or two justices might leave, which he took the strong implication that he's essentially saying, you got a nice justice here, shame if anything would happen to him.
And Mark, that's kind of what happened, right? The idea was he floated the idea. It wasn't just a discussion about, I think we should make more money, which I'm sure all of us have had with either friends or bosses in some way. It was the implication that you could lose me if this doesn't get fixed.
Absolutely. And I think the timing here is really important. This initial conversation took place in January 2000, and Justice Thomas put a timestamp on his request there. He said, one or two justices might step down within a year. Well, at the time, everyone knew the presidential election was looming. There was a real chance that Al Gore could win. And that meant if Clarence Thomas felt the need to step down so he could make more money, that he might be replaced not by another conservative, but by a liberal, which is the worst nightmare of the conservative legal movement. And so, I'll note that private conference he was at, which was extremely lavish and extravagant, he refused to actually reveal that in his financial disclosure forms that year, as ProPublica notes. So he was already getting into the habit of hiding all of this stuff from the public. But I think Justice Thomas really made it clear this has to happen very quickly. And that's when the gifts from billionaires began showering down all around him. And it's pretty much impossible not to draw the conclusion that his benefactors took note, and he had decided he would become indispensable as long as he could live extravagantly, and told his benefactors, let me live this well by any means necessary. If you can't lobby for a raise, if you can't lobby to let me give paid speeches, at least let me live the lavish lifestyle of a law firm partner. And that's exactly what happened.
And Maya, it appears that none of this may be illegal. Certainly most of it isn't illegal. It does smack of something. As somebody like yourself who spent most of your career in the public service, you've made some choices. And in those jobs, you make certain choices. Almost never does somebody who is well-trained and well-educated do as well for themselves financially in the public service as they do in the private sector.
Yeah, look, anybody who goes to law school makes a choice.
Yeah.
And the choice is, do you want to be a public servant or do you want to serve the private bar, as we call it? And you'll make significantly more money if you join the private bar. But let's just be honest about public servants, especially at this level of career, are very highly paid, and highly paid significantly more than most Americans who are working very hard and living a middle-class life and not making as much, sometimes not with as good of benefits. So I just say that because it really is a choice. It's a choice we make. I think the important part of this story is not whether it's a crime, but whether or not we're stealing the public's confidence in the neutral arbitration of decisions that will impact their lives, because that's what the Supreme Court does every day. And once you pull together I like this job. You need me to make ideological decisions, so you want me to stay in the job. That's already a problem for the public's confidence. The next part of that problem is, oh, by the way, now I am sitting in the chair next to very powerful billionaires who have an agenda repeatedly, and I am financially dependent on them in certain ways for a lifestyle that gets me buying a $267,000 RV, right? That's not about principles and just making. And add all of that up, we're having a debate in this country about what kinds of ethic laws should be mandatory and binding on some of the most powerful people in our government, the Supreme Court justices. This is just a pattern that shows why most Americans don't trust the Supreme Court right now. That's devastating for democracy because this is the third branch of government.
Right.
It is supposed to be independent. It is supposed to be neutral. And the problem here isn't whether Clarence Thomas wanted to make more money. Quit. Get another job, and you can. It's that he wasn't making what he wanted to. And then he was taking money and then knowingly not disclosing it repeatedly while he's sitting with people who have an ideological agenda. That's a problem.
Jesse, Maya brought up an interesting point here. These are, and this is something that ProPublica has been on since these stories first came out, and that is that the idea that most people have, maybe people don't care or care about what Clarence Thomas took, but the idea is that they are neutral arbiters of matters that are of great import. And some of the people who have been involved in giving some of these justices gifts or benefits of some sort do have either an ideological or a highly specific reason to have business before the Supreme Court. They've got it cannot be disentangled from the fact that some people have agendas, and currying favor with a Supreme Court justice, if you have an agenda, it's bad for democracy.
Yeah, it's now let's just be clear. We've never been able to identify any one of the benefactors, the many benefactors of Thomas. Harlan Crow's chief among them, but you've got Blockbuster's Wayne Huizenga, you've got several other guys. They never had cases that were directly in front of the court in the kind of extremely bald manner where Thomas did something unusual and you could see, well, there must be some quid pro quo there. We don't have that. We did report earlier this year that Sam Alito went on a lavish trip with Leonard Leo, Leo, one of the conservative activists, funded with a hedge fund billionaire who was a conservative activist who then had a case before the court, and Alito didn't recuse. With Thomas, we haven't had that. But what the speculation is from experts is that what this does is it kind of cocoons Thomas in a lifestyle that is lavish and comfortable, and an ideological cocoon, an ideological kind of bubble of like-minded people who feed him the latest, greatest thinking in conservative legal thought. And so this is kind of working twofold to kind of keep the consistency of his views, because there have been a lot of right-wing judges who've moved left over the history of the court. They wanted to prevent that, and it seems, to make him very comfortable with making less money than he could make in the private sector.
Mark, let's just, Maya brought up a point about whether you think Supreme Court justices are paid well or not well. I just want to put up a comparison. This is from ProPublica. It's part of the article. The median salary in 2022 is $60,000 in the United States. It means half of all people make more, half make less. A member of Congress makes $174,000. An associate Supreme Court justice makes $274,000. And to Maya's point, a partner at the highest paying law firms could make $7,294,000. It's a different game. And if you want to make that choice, you make that choice. And a lot of people's parents would say that's a very good choice to make, to be a partner at a high-paying law firm. But public service is not there. It is many times what the average American or what the median American makes, nonetheless.
That's absolutely right. I see those salaries for justices, and I see the complaints from people like Clarence Thomas that they aren't enough. And I think, cry me a river. You are getting paid well over what the vast majority of Americans earn in a year. You are able to build up a huge amount of savings. You are able to pay off loans with a salary like that. Most people's eyes would pop at a salary like that. Thomas is upset that he's not making as much as a partner at a top law firm, at Big Law.
Which is true.
Working in Big Law is essentially the opposite of public service. It's like doing the worst work possible that harms the public, and you're paid millions of dollars to soothe your conscience. Clarence Thomas is welcome to do that, to work against the public's interest in private and make a lot of money, but he decided he wanted to work against the public interest on the Supreme Court and allow his billionaires to share all of their money with him.